I want to go right back to the very early days. I want to talk about the importance of EC Comics to you, because as the night progresses, we're going to be referring back to EC Comics many times.
Well, you know, I grew up on EC comic books before the code, when they were, you know, pretty rough. A lot of gore, and they were, you know, basically really uncensored, sort of morality tales, you know. They were, you know, the bad guys always got their comeuppance, and it celebrated, you know, the gore. I mean, if they would rip out somebody's heart and use it as home plate, you know, in a baseball game. It was that kind of stuff. And, you know, I would sit there just giggling over the stuff. And Steve King and I have often talked about this. And, you know, when people start cringing in a horror movie, you know, he and I are the guys in the back row giggling, you know. That stuff just makes me giggle. It doesn't really turn me off in any way. I've only used the extreme stuff in the zombie films that we've made. The other movies that I've made, I've sort of, you know, tried to even it out. But I've had this conceit that, in a slightly different way, but a bit like Altman's movie version of MASH, where, you know, you laugh your ass off for 90 minutes, and then all of a sudden there's this 30-second scene in the operating room where there's blood squirting out of the arteries, and it just gives you a little zets, you know, and it sort of reminds you that maybe you should be thinking about a little something more than just the chuckles.
Another very important aspect of the EC Comics was the beginnings of your awareness of how to visually tell a story. And I think you would later develop comic book style narrative techniques in cinema.
I think to some extent I did do that. I used that. But to some extent, though, I don't know how many people know the process of making film, but
there's a few people out there.
Yeah,
a few filmmakers out there.
I was, to some extent, covering my ass. I mean, the easiest way to be able to shoot a scene is to, if there are 3 people talking, get a close-up of each. And then you can, in the editing room, you can shorten the script, you can lengthen it, you can do whatever you want with it, rather than do masters. And that was sort of my trick in the early days, when we didn't have any money, we didn't have dollies, and we didn't have the, you know, cranes and the equipment to make sort of fancy shots. And I didn't want to just shoot a flat master wide shot. So that's what I would do, and I developed it more as a trick. But I think some of that did come from comics. I was able to, got some sort of a sense from comics about when to go in tight and when to cut wide, you know, those very sort of basic things. But the film that I think that influenced me the most in terms of visual storytelling is a film called The Tales of Hoffman. It's a Michael Powell film. Extraordinary film. It's an opera. I mean, if those people who haven't seen it should try to check it out. There's a very good Criterion DVD out there of it.
You've expressed a desire on a number of occasions to develop a sort of a remake of Tales of Hoffman, a space opera version.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I had this idea to do Hoffman in space.
Okay, so let's talk briefly about Night of the Living Dead. So much has already been said about the film, and in terms of how ruthlessly it's been analyzed, and there's almost a counter-analytical perspective that you all seem to champion in interviews, trying to discredit any conscious intent to layer this film with so much deep political subtext. But the one thing that nobody can deny is the power of the ending of Night of the Living Dead. It's utterly nihilistic, and in a tradition of film where dominant ideological values are reasserted at the end with the hopes of making the audience feel like everything's okay and it's good to leave the theatre and rejoin their lives. In your film, Night of the Living Dead, and this sets a trend for a number of films, dominant ideological values are reasserted, but you feel absolutely traumatized by that. And I think people talk about the visceral gore in the film, but probably what disturbed audiences most, I believe in 1968, without them being fully conscious of it, is the fact that they'd just been raped and pillaged by, ideologically, by a film. So could you comment on this bent in you to create these nihilistic, apocalyptic endings?
Well, it was a lot simpler in my mind and in all of our minds when we were shooting it. We basically just didn't want to restore order. That was the thing. One of our big complaints, my biggest complaint about horror, about fantasy cinema usually, is that, you know, I mean, you do it to upset the apple cart, to upset the ways of the world. And then traditionally, in the end, you sort of restore it all. And you say, well, why the hell did we go through it in the first place? And so I thought, I have to leave the world a mess, first of all. And then the script was written with that ending before we knew that it was going to be a black man playing that role. And Dwayne, we cast Dwayne in the role because he was the best actor from among our friends. And we didn't realize, I didn't realize at the time what sort of power that would have. I mean, Dwayne was saying to me, even all during the shoot, you know, he would say things to me like, wait a minute, man, I'm the guy that has to walk out of the theater after I slug this white dame here. And, you know, he was sort of making me aware of things that I wasn't even thinking of. We thought we were being, you know, very hip by not changing the script when Dwayne agreed to do the role. And now I almost think that maybe we should have. I think we missed a bet there. He's wrong. That character makes mistakes, and it's out of anger. And I thought that, I think now that would have been interesting. You know, sometimes a person in that minority position sees certain things very clearly, but then is blinded to certain other things because of anger and a rage that comes out of just his feeling of not feeling included. And I think that might have been a nice theme. If we tried to write it and do it with any finesse, we probably would have gotten pretty corny with it and wouldn't have worked out. But now I wish that maybe we would have done that a little more. And then, of course, the final scenes. I mean, it's not just the very, very ending. It's when daylight comes. And here comes the posse, and here comes all these rednecks, and, you know, it's like all the assholes of the earth, you know, oh shit, they're back. And to me, those are the real zombies, you know, here they come, fuck, man, we're not going to get away. And that came from we were 60s guys. We really thought that we had an honest chance at having changed the world at that time. And, you know, then you turn around and not only has it not changed for the better, but probably to some extent for the worse. I mean, things were actually starting to get worse right then. That was sort of the beginning of that downhill. And so that's the anger that I think created those final scenes. And it's not just the scene where they shoot him at the very end. It's, I think, every time, from the moment when you see these guys coming, and it's the news guys and the deputy sheriffs and the rednecks with all their guns and everything, you know, it's like, oh, we'll take care of this. We got the firepower. And I think that whole part of the film is really expresses most what we were feeling and that sort of anger that we were feeling at the time.
Okay, we're going to talk about The Crazies, which really bridges the gap between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead fantastically. You revisit that apocalyptic nihilism of Night of the Living Dead, but visually we see the early template for what you would perfect more in Dawn of the Dead. So let's get back to talking about that visual style that you adopted, which you at one point referred to as cubism.
Well, I used to call it cubism because of so many shots and so many different angles, and you know, I was trying to structure an impression of what was happening in a three-dimensional space by using a lot of two-dimensional angles on it. And again, some of that grew out of again sort of covering my ass with a lot of coverage, as much coverage as I could get. But I think that it does. Pre-say, even though it was a different DP, Bill Heinzman shot.
The first zombie in Night of the Living
The
Dead.
first zombie in Night of the Living Dead shot the Crazies. He was the DP on the Crazies, and Michael Gornick shot Dawn of the Dead. So two different guys completely, but we used to hang out a lot and we talked a lot, and I think, you know, their lighting styles were the same. We all were developing this style ourselves. I mean, we had this little community of people, and all of us could do everything. I mean, we all knew how to run, to record the sound, to edit, to, you know, we had our own dubbers, we had all our own equipment in the shop, and everybody knew how to run all of the equipment, and everybody could cross over into everyone else's job. So, I mean, we really were this little sort of community of people that all really cared about the media and wanted to learn as much as we could about how to make a movie. And so, you know, and there was this sort of, I don't know, communal evolution to the way we were doing things.
And again, the Crazies would be plagued with distribution problems.
Yeah.
Instead of like, I mean, the release constituted, I think, of 2 movie theaters in New York with one big billboard and a bunch of people walking around in the suits, handing out flyers. And how many people showed up?
Oh, very few. I mean, it was terrible. This guy, Lee Hessel, distributed it, and Canvas, I think, was the name of the company. I forgot. But he had just had he was sort of a porn guy. He was making porn stuff, and then he was successful with a soft porn thing called Cry Uncle. And I don't know if anybody would know John Avildsen, I think. And so he wanted to sort of break out of that reputation that he had. And he said, okay, he financed the Crazies. And that was his sort of way out. But then I don't think he knew how to distribute it. You know, he distributed it the way he might distribute Deep Throat or whatever, you know, stick it in a theater on 42nd Street. People will come.
1978, Dawn of the Dead. Has anyone heard of that one?
Yeah!
The only thing I want to talk about with Dawn of the Dead is it was your first significant battle with the MPAA. I mean, you dealt with them on Martin, but you successfully managed to bypass the MPAA rating system.
Yeah, but only because the distributor agreed to release the film unrated. So, I mean, we couldn't have done it ourselves. We would have really come up against, we probably would have had to cut, you know, I don't know, 13 minutes. In the UK, they wanted us to cut 13 minutes out of it. Actually, it's not true. They wanted
to cut 13 minutes out of Dario's
version,
which was shorter than yours.
Yeah.
And only 30 seconds out of yours.
Yeah, because Dario had the right to change the film, to do with it what he thought would be best for a European audience. And he didn't think they were ready for all the gags, the sight gags and the humor and all that. And he wanted it to be all goblin all the way and all hard-hitting effects and, you know. And
but
like
he was right from a financial perspective. It played really well over there.
Oh, it did. He was right.
But how do you feel about your work? Because the stuff he took out of it is really integral to what the film is about.
I thought so, and we argued about it at the time. I mean, you know, we had a ball with it. He had the absolute right to do it. I knew it going in, and I trusted him to do it, and he did a good job with it, you know, and the Goblin stuff is really good. It's just that I didn't want to use all of it, and, you know, we had the right to use as much of it as we wanted or none of it, and so it was a very good relationship and a very fair deal. It was basically, okay, you do whatever you want to do, and, you know, here's what I'm going to do. And, you know, it was very fair, and they were very straightforward about it. So I'm not complaining about that at all. I did think that they were missing some of the messages. You know, they were just missing some of what was integral to the whole idea. And the fact is that in the UK, that when they saw the US version of it with the humor, they only did want to cut like 30 seconds out of it or so. So they were much harder on Dario's version.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, George Romero.